If we were live, I would actually bring one of you up as my volunteer to help me out with this. However, since we're virtual, I'm not going to do that, but let me explain how it would work if we were live, and then I'll do the modification for you. So if we were live, I'd bring up a volunteer and then hand them this bell. Then I would begin telling everyone a story that I made up, and anytime you wanted, you could ring the bell. When you did, I'd have to stop, go back, and repeat what I said, but change it somehow. So if my story was, once upon a time, there was a girl with a pet dog. Once upon a time, there was a girl with a pet cat, with a pet mouse, with a pet giraffe, with a pet sweet potato. Like, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Whenever you would ring, I would change. When the bell stopped ringing, I would keep going, but only as if I said the last thing. So in this example, the dog, the cat, the mouse, and the giraffe would be gone, and we'd have a story about a girl and her pet, sweet potato. That's all there is to it. But I do, to prove to you this is improvised, right? Because you might be sitting there thinking, oh, well, if you don't have a volunteer, this would be pretty easy. Oh, we're going to get to that, George. You might be thinking, oh, well, you could just script this. Well, two things. Number one, I'm going to start with a suggestion. So what I'd like you is in the chat, just give me a suggestion of, say, an occupation, a type of job, just a random job. Don't overthink it. I'm going to pick one of those as my starting point to prove that this is improvised. So in the chat, what's a job? We got a few coming in. Dentist, dancer, trash collector, teacher, oh, barber, police officer. Fantastic. Ooh, veterinarian. I like all of these. I'm going to go with one of the earlier ones I saw was, let's go with a barber. I don't think I've ever done barber before. So I'm going to do a story with a barber, and I'm going to ding myself. So instead of having a volunteer, I'm going to ring the bell and change periodically. Now, like I said, that might seem like, oh, it's not going to be improvised, but I'm starting with a random suggestion like barber. And I think you'll see from the speed and the random direction this story is going to end up going that it'd be very hard for me to have pre-planned this. So here we go. Once upon a time, there was a man named John, and John was a barber, and he was the best barber in the whole town. He was the worst barber. He was an old barber. He was a brand new barber. He never had any clients. So he opened his store, and people were like, wait, I don't know what you're doing. People said, wait, you don't look like a barber. People just started flocking because he was giving away free first haircuts. The problem was every haircut he did was terrible. People would complain. People would love it. They're like, I've always had a good haircut. Now I have a bad haircut. Now people will stay away from me. People demanded their money back. They were angry and demanding their money back. People started attacking him. Literally, he'd finished cutting their hair, and the haircut was so bad that they would pick up the scissors and chase him. Well, later that night, he's talking to his wife. Later that night, he was talking to himself because he's not married. Later that night, he was talking to his dog, who was his only friend. And he said to his dog, Dog, I need to get better at haircutting. What can I do? And the dog just looked at him because dogs don't talk. The dog started talking. The dog said, I can teach you how to cut hair. And the barber's like, you can talk? The barber's like, oh, it's about time. You've been quiet for so long. The dog said, I don't care if you're a magic dog. Teach me how to cut hair. So the barber actually was an accomplished, I mean, the dog was an accomplished barber and taught him how to cut hair. And the man learned and lived happily ever after. All right. That story could have kept going. I just kind of ended that for the sake of time. So just wanted to use that to show you an example of improv comedy. That's improv comedy. It's a game called Ding, obviously. And for me, that game is a perfect metaphor for how life works. Like, have you ever felt this way? Like you were going along and things are going pretty well. You've got things sort of figured out. You're on top of things. But then the universe comes along and goes, ding, now deal with this. Or as I like to say, sometimes ding happens. Life is the ultimate improvisation. And planning is important. I'm not poo-pooing planning. It's important and helpful. But I have found that what separates people who succeed from those who struggle is not just how well they plan, but rather how quickly and effectively they respond to those ding moments when they occur, because they inevitably will. Anyone can do well when everything goes according to plan. I think you demonstrate your skill and your value and how you set yourself apart from the competition by how you respond to change and those unexpected ding moments that change the game for everyone. And these ding moments come in all shapes and sizes, right? They can be huge, like a global pandemic that shuts down the world and changes everything about how we do everything. Or they can be very small, like getting stuck in traffic and that makes you late for a meeting. They can be internally driven, like your company switching over a software system and now you have to learn and change what you're doing. Or they can be externally driven, like when a law or regulation changes and now you have to do things in a different way. And they excuse me, and they can be very general, like the types of things that hit a lot of industries, like staffing issues or supply chain, or they could be very specific to the types of things most of you on the call deal with, like having to deal with financial markets and shifting economic situations, right? So whatever it is, whatever the size and shape of the ding, I think we'd all agree that we would love to be able to navigate these ding moments, respond to change, and keep ourselves, our organizations, and our teams moving forward. And there are barriers to this, but I think the real issue is something deeper. It's that we get stuck thinking informationally rather than improvisationally. Now, what I mean by that is I can't see anyone on this call. I don't know anyone, but I think it's safe to assume that you are all smart, logical people. Now, one of you might be saying, well, you don't know my colleague Steve. Well, all right. Benefit of the doubt, safe to assume you're all smart, logical people, which means when you're faced with a ding moment or an unexpected response from someone, you start with logic and reason. But I think you'd also agree that people, we as humans, are often not logical and reasonable. We are often, excuse me, oh my goodness, we are often emotional, irrational, sometimes confounding decision makers. And when you start with logic and reason and just stick with that, that's when you could feel like you're banging your head against a wall, getting stressed and frustrated. Which is why, if you accept the premise that life is the ultimate improvisation, it stands to reason that we need to think not just informationally, but also improvisationally. The same skills that let an improv comedian navigate the ding moments in an improv game can help you navigate the ding moments in your professional and personal lives and help you move into and through an uncertain future. The way I'm going to share with you today about how to do that, someone alluded to in the chat. I'm going to share with you one simple but powerful idea from the world of improv. And that is simply to say yes and. One of the first things you learn when you learn improv comedy is the difference between yes and yes but. And you learn that yes and is the key to working with others, to responding to all that craziness that happens on the stage, and to opening up your creativity. And off stage, I found that yes and is the key to effective communication, to responding to change, and to opening up innovation. This is what I'm going to talk about, what yes and is, why it's important, and how you can start using it immediately to connect with others, open up your creativity, and navigate more effectively through this ever-changing world. Along the way, I'm going to do a couple more improv games. I'm going to use your participation in the chat to play those. I have in the past attempted to pull a volunteer off on the camera, but because the audio and the lag, it sort of never works. So we're going to keep our interaction through the chat. So just be ready when I ask you to throw some stuff into the chat. So the first thing I want to do is explain what exactly yes and is, and to a degree what it isn't, because there can be some confusion. And rather than explain it, I'm going to demonstrate the difference between yes and yes but with an improv game. This is one where I am going to have a conversation. And as I am explaining it, let me get the suggestion going here. For this game, what I'm going to need is a suggestion of a minor disagreement that two people might have. Like nothing major, like should we get divorced? But what's a small issue that two people might disagree over and kind of be at odds at? Just throw that in the chat as I'm explaining what I'm going to do with that suggestion. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to act out a conversation between two people. And I'm going to act out both roles, just switching back and forth between them. And then what I'm going to do is the first time I go through the conversation, I'm going to have one person make a suggestion. And after that, every sentence will start with the two words, yes, but. So here's my suggestion. Yes, but fill in my sentence. Yes, but fill in my sentence. Then I'm going to let that go for about a minute. And then I will stop and redo that conversation, replacing the yes, but with yes, and, so we can experience the difference. All right, so let me look through. We got a lot of great suggestions. Where to go for vacation, dog names, what to wear for Halloween, who's a better driver, what movie, who's going to win the NLDS. Well, I am based in Philadelphia, so that answer should be obvious. Let's see, where to go for dinner, what movie to watch, what should we spend money. All right, a lot of great answers. I'm going to pick where to go on vacation. So this is let's say it's a married couple, and they're going to disagree over where to go for vacation. The first time through, I'm going to use yes and, or yes but. And then I'll switch to yes and so you can see how the two differ. And here we go. Hey, honey, it's time for us to plan our vacation. And I was thinking we could go to the beach this year. Yes, but the beach is very hot, and I'd much rather go to the mountains because I like to hike. Yes, but we went to the mountains last year, and I got really bored. I don't like hiking. Yes, but I only get 2 weeks off, and I really need the time to unwind and just chill. So I think we should go where I want to go. Yeah, but I feel like we always do what you want to do, and we never get to do what I want to do. Yeah, but every other thing we do is about what you want to do, like where we go for dinner and what movies we see. Yeah, but those are small things that you could get what you want. I'd happily give you some of that if we could go to where I want to go for vacation. All right, I'm gonna pause there. We could keep going with that, but you could see that that is pretty much devolving quickly. Emotions were going to get high, and that was not going to end well for anyone involved. So let's see. What I'm going to do is redo that conversation, and I'm going to do it with the same opening suggestion. So I'm going to have this partner suggest going to the beach, but this time every sentence will start with yes and instead of yes but, so you can kind of experience and see how they differ. Here we go. Hey, honey, it's time to plan for our vacation, and I really think we should go to the beach this year. Yes, and I know you love the beach, so I had some ideas about where we could go that have a lot of activities to do, so I can do things I like too. Yes, and I was thinking if we go to the beach that I really like and looked up in Maryland, there's these actually near the woods where there's some great hiking trails, so we can do both things. Yes, and I know that you really like to relax and recharge, so we can find a place where you can do that and I can do my thing. Yes, and I know that a lot of times we do what I want to do, so maybe leading up to that, because you don't like it as much, you can pick some of the dinner places too while we're down there. Yes, and that would be great, and I think that we can be both happy there. All right, I kind of lost where to go with that because they both just agreed. All right, so that's an example of the difference a conversation can have when two people say yes, but versus yes, and. Now, obviously, that's improv comedy, and it's a little bit silly, but you can see right away that the yes, but, starting from a default of yes, but, immediately creates a fight and an argument, and just no one gets anywhere. No progress is made, right? You just argue. With yes, and, you could probably even through the computer screen feel how it's positive. The two are really considering each other, and they're really making a lot of progress in their planning, right? They had planned the part of the thing, they had figured out where they're going to go, they had talked about where they're going to eat, right? Now, sometimes the thing can get ridiculous. It's like, we want to go to the beach. Yes, and let's go to Hawaii. Yes, and let's rent a villa near the woods so we can also hike at the same time. That's the improv game. But in general, you can see that yes, but is negative, stops progress, and hurts the relationship. Yes, and is positive, collaborative, and keeps things moving forward. And then I need to pause for a minute and talk to my realist friends who are watching. Because right now, some of you are saying to yourselves, well, that's great, Avish, for improv comedy. But in the real world, you can't just say yes and it's everything. Sometimes you disagree. Sometimes the other person is just wrong. And you're right. So I'm not suggesting that if a colleague were to come to you and say, hey, I haven't worked on this project for the last 3 weeks like I was supposed to. Can you do it for me? I'm not suggesting you say, yes, and let me pick up your dry cleaning. Right? And one thing I've learned now, I've been married about 10 years. One thing I've learned is should my wife ever come to me and say, does this make me look fat? Yes, and a little old. Like, okay, no, it's not a literal technique. You don't just say yes and agree to everything. But remember, what I'm talking about is ding moments and default responses. And for so many of us, the default response to anything new, different, not in our plan, or that makes us feel defensive or uncertain, is to immediately respond with a yes, but. All I'm suggesting is we can reap some tremendous benefits by switching that but to an and, because there's more than one way of using it, right? You don't have to just accept and agree and add like we did here. You can pivot, get curious, and dig deeper, right? Because so someone comes to you and says, hey, I want to do this party on a beach. You don't have to say, yeah, but that's a stupid idea. And you don't have to say, yes, and let's go to the beaches in Hawaii. You could say, yes, and tell me more about that. Yes, and why is the beach important to you? Yes, and how do you see that working? Yes, and what are the logistics and goes into us vacationing at the beach? Right? You dig deeper and deeper and deeper. Because a lot of times when someone comes to you with an issue here, it's not the real issue. It's something down here. But when you say yes, but, you keep the focus on something that may not even matter. When you say yes, and you can uncover that deeper thing. And here's the thing. When you say yes, but to someone, they're going to say yes, but back. And now you're in a yes but battle. And let me let you in on a little secret. When two yes buts collide, the bigger butt wins. Right? The person who's in a greater position of authority, who can make the decisions, who could just take their ball and go home, can ultimately say, yeah, but we're going to do it my way. And when you use logic and reason and just hammer back with yes buts, that's when you get that frustration and that stress. When you use yes and, you might find that common ground. You might find what they really want. Like maybe the one person didn't really care that much about the beach, right? They just wanted to be able to relax. And if you could find a place to relax at the beach or the mountains or anywhere else, right? So we uncover. Now, sometimes you're going to be the one with the bigger butt, right? You're going to be the decision maker or the authority. And you can respond with a yes, but. You can. But when you do that, you lose the opportunity to help. Like even if you're right, even if the person, whether it's a client or an employee or a colleague is asking you for, you might be right saying, yeah, but we can't do that. But maybe if you had that yes and conversation, you could figure out what they really want and help and serve. But if you can't, if you dig deeper and have that yes and conversation, if you have to say no or yes but after having had a yes and conversation, that rejection is met with differently. So the person feels like you listened to them, respected them, and understood them. It is the ultimate communication tool. And if you think about it, I think you all agree with me, but if I scroll back up, the opening question I asked you, what one thing would make the world a better place? The answers were things like collaboration, being kind, communication, listening. Those all start with switching our default from yes, but to yes, and. Right? Yes, and is the kind response. It's the good communication response. It's the good listening response. It's the empathetic response, right? Everything that was put in the chat box that will make the world a better place, I agree would make the better place. And they all start by switching our default from a but to an and. Think about what your culture would be like, how it would be like to go into work if everyone's default position was to start with yes and. It's the ultimate communication tool, but it is so much more than that. It is the key to accepting change and moving into and through an uncertain future. And it's more important now than ever. In a world that's constantly changing, where technology is changing, where the economy and regulations and laws are changing, and we have staffing issues and personnel are changing, right? The switch from but to and is not just a nice to have, it's a must have. Because when we say yes, but to change, we are staying in our comfort zone, right? We're saying, I'm going to resist the change and maintain the status quo. The problem is the status quo is not enough to stay competitive and relevant in a constantly changing world, right? Maintaining the status quo is also how we get overwhelmed and burnt out. Because when we resist change, we say yes, but and resist change. What we're doing is we're fighting it, and then the world changes, and then we have to play catch up. It changes too much, we have to play catch up. And then we resist the change again, and then ding happens, and now we have to play catch up. So if you feel like you're on that hamster wheel, always playing catch up, always behind, it's often because we're saying yes, but and resisting change. To shift that, we have to shift how we think about change. We have to find opportunity in the unexpected, and we have to look at change as opportunity for innovation. The problem is when ding happens or we're going through a change, the natural response is to want things to go back to the way they were before. Quick example from my own life. A few years back, I was in a relationship, and she was great. We got along great. We were falling in love. It was all very romantic. But the problem was there were some long-term compatibility issues. That was going to make it hard for us to get married and have children and raise a family together, which was important to both of us. So we tried to work it out for a while, but eventually we made the mature decision to go our separate ways so we could each find someone more compatible. And it was good. It was an amicable breakup, and I was fine with it for a little while. Because then some time passed, and then I started to miss her. And then that voice started in the back of my head. You know that voice that says things like, maybe you shouldn't have broken up. Maybe you should try. Maybe you could have figured it out. Maybe you should try to get back together. Now, if you've ever been here, you know this is a bad mental space to be in because you start doing things self-respecting adults should not do. Like you make phone calls at hours of the night, you should not make a phone call. You write and send long emotional emails that may have included poetry. that you may have written yourself. You put together and send mixtapes. Come on. I know some of you on this Zoom or on this meeting have put together a mixtape or received it. In fact, go ahead in the chat. If you've ever sent a mixtape to an ex or received a mixtape from an ex, write yes in the chat. Just out yourself right now, right? Just admit it. And while that's coming in, yeah, there they come. Oh my goodness. Yes, yes, yes. Now, I can't see the faces out there. So I don't know, maybe there's some people from other countries or maybe there's some younger people. If you are unfamiliar with the concept of a mixtape, this is back in the day when it was harder to put together a song list than just clicking on Spotify or clicking on iTunes. Back when you had to find the songs and put them onto some kind of physical media, like burning onto a CD or recording onto a cassette. Sometimes by holding the tape recorder up to the radio speaker and waiting for the DJ to stop talking. Right? Back when you were going through a change or going through a breakup, you would put together a song of such emotional power that your ex, upon hearing this mixtape, would have no choice but to immediately fall back in love with you. Now, let me let you in on a little secret. If you find yourself going through a breakup, tempted to put together a mixtape, don't do it. They don't work. There's never been a breakup in history where two people got back together because one person put together an awesome mixtape for the other. No one has ever uttered the words, Phil Collins, our love is against all odds. Don't do it. Doesn't work. Now, my situation was no different. We did not get back together, even though it really was an epic mixtape. We did not get back together, and it worked out so much better for me in the long run because a little while later, I met someone more compatible. We got together, we got married, and we now have two wonderful sons together. Now, here's the thing. It worked out better for me, but back then, when I was going through that change, I didn't care. I didn't care there was something better out there for me, and I didn't care this wasn't the best situation anyways. All I could think about was that things had changed, it was different and uncomfortable, and I just wish things could go back to the way it was before. And this is what we all do when we're going through a ding moment or faced with a change, right? We just wish things could go back, or we put our heads down and resist and try to maintain the status quo. But again, remember, the status quo is not going to be enough to stay relevant in a changing world. And the status quo is what's going to keep you on that hamster wheel. Right? To break out of that, we need to change the question and start moving forward and looking into the future instead of looking backwards. Right? Instead of saying, why can't things be like they were? We need to say, how can we make this new reality even better than the old one? Right? Instead of saying, what can we do to keep doing things the same way, even though things are changing, we have to say, what can we do differently now to take advantage of the changes that have happened? Right? We keep pulling focus from the past and how do we go backwards to how do we make the future even better than the old thing that was good. Now, you won't always get a brilliant answer, but by asking the question, you open your minds to opportunities you never would have seen otherwise. And here's the thing, you don't need a brilliant answer every time. One good answer every once in a while is enough to be transformative because most of the world is saying, how can we go backwards? When you become the person who looks forward and gets others looking forward for opportunity, that's how you lead. That's how you differentiate. So let me ask you a question. What's on your mixtape? Like, you know you've got them. I teach this stuff and I've got them. What's that thing you're holding on to, or what's that change you're resisting, right? It could be just looking back at the world and saying, oh my God, things were so much better pre-COVID when we could meet in person and this remote hybrid stuff is hard. It could be, you know, that superstar employee that left over the years and you're like, oh my God, things were so much better when Pat was here. I missed that. I wish we could go back to that. Or it could be that, you know, change in the software platform your organization is rolling out and you're like, oh, I don't want to change. I'm very comfortable doing things the way they are now. Right? Whatever it is, legitimate or not, you might be right. Maybe some of those past situations were great. But the more you spend time focusing on that, the less you can have to move forward and embrace the future and find opportunity. The minute you can let that go and step forward, powerful things start to happen. It's very simple and very powerful. But if it's so simple and so powerful, why do we still default to yes, but. Why is yes, but the default? Well, there's a few reasons. The one I'm going to share with you is probably the one I think is the most powerful. We default to yes, but because we are afraid of uncertainty. When we say yes, but, what we're saying is we're going to stay in our comfort zone where we feel like we have a little bit of certainty and a little bit of control. Now, whether you actually have certainty and control is debatable. But when you say yes, but, you feel like you have certainty and control. When you say yes and step out of the comfort zone, you are stepping into uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen. And that is scary. But in improv, you learn that in that uncertainty is where all the good stuff happens. I'm going to demonstrate this idea of stepping into uncertainty with one more improv game. For this one, I do need one more suggestion. Let's go with let's start with a location. Just a type of place, but something a little bit off the beaten path. So not just like a bar or beach or coffee shop. What's like a random location for my story to take place in? Just throw that in the chat. While those are coming in, let me explain what I'm going to do. I'm going to play a game called the alphabet story, or A to Z. What's going to happen is I'm going to pick one of the suggestions, and then I'm going to start telling you a story. And the first sentence I say, the first word of that sentence has to start with the letter A. Then the next sentence I say has to start with the letter B. The next sentence has to start with C, and then D, and then so on and so on. I might not get all the way to Z. I just want to go far enough to either end the story or give you a flavor for the game. But I'm going to go quickly through. All right, we got a lot of great suggestions. Ha! All right, one of these made me laugh. I have a general. Ooh, two made me laugh, but I have a general. Wow, these. Oh my goodness. All right. I normally have a rule that if a suggestion makes me giggle, I take it. The problem is, looking through this, there's at least three that made me giggle: Witch Museum, Emu Farm, Igloo, Bat Cave, and Cat Cafe. All fantastic. I'm going to go with the first one that made me laugh, which was Cat Cafe. So I'm going to tell you a story involving a cat cafe. The first sentence I say will start with the letter A, then B, and so on and so on. And then I'll explain why exactly I did that. And here we go. As Johnny looked over his cat cafe, he realized that he had the best collection of cats in the neighborhood. Before he could open, though, he needed to get his permits to prove that his cat cafe was clean. Cleanliness is the most important thing, said the inspector as he was looking around Johnny's cat cafe. Destroying any evidence of cat poop that happened to be around, Johnny was quickly shoving it aside, but the inspector noticed. Entering into his report that the cat cafe was not clean, the inspector started finishing his report. Free coffee I'll give you, said Johnny, for the rest of your life if you just give me a good inspection. Going to bribe a cat cafe inspector is a federal crime, and now I'm going to arrest you, said the inspector. Hold on a second, said Johnny. What if instead of free coffee, I give you any or as many cats as you want? I have always had a thing for cats, but never really got one. If I can adopt a cat, if I can adopt 5 cats, then yes, I will accept what you say. Johnny was ecstatic. He had too many cats anyways, and now his cat cafe could open just fine. Kicking a cat, the inspector said, I want that one. Looking horrified, Johnny couldn't believe that he had just promised this inspector who kicked cats 5 of them. Maybe you should let me hold on to the cats that are yours and you can come visit them, said Johnny. You don't seem like the type that can keep a cat. No, my good man, said the inspector. You have promised me cats and I will keep them and I will treat them in the way that I want. Opening the door, Johnny shooed all the cats out and said, run away, cats, run away, cats. I'd rather you be free than go to this inspector. Poor decision, said the inspector. Now your cat cafe will go out of business. Quickly changing his plan, Johnny, now that he had no more cats, said, I'll just make it a regular cafe. People came, they drank, and the cats lived happily ever after. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. So that is A to Z. You get the gist of how that works. Now, the reason I use that to demonstrate this idea of uncertainty and how it works in the world of improv comedy is because when you are the improviser telling that story, and sometimes you do this as a 2-person scene where they alternate and I'd start with A and you would start with B, but however you're playing this game, what happens is, for example, in the story version, you start out and you have a rough idea for the story and where it'll go. And you'll say a sentence, but then you'll have an idea for the next sentence, but it will not start with the next letter of the alphabet. Now, in that moment, you have 2 choices. The first choice, which is the default for almost every new improviser and even some experienced improvisers, is your first thought is, ooh, what word can I make that will start with the next letter of the alphabet that will let me stay on this path, this story I had, right? Because I have an idea for this story, and it's a pretty good idea, and I think it'll go well. So what can I say? Now, when the person has that approach, here's a story I wanted to tell. Ooh, the next letter is the wrong letter. Let me think. A few things happen. Number one, the story slows down because they have to pause to think of a word that will fit the story they want to tell. Number two, it ends up not being as creative because you get tunnel vision. Here's the idea for the story. I'm going to force it down this path and ignore all the opportunities to be creative. And number three, the game ultimately ends up being far less successful because it's not creative, it's not fast, and it's often not even fun for the performer playing it. It feels more like work to try to think of the right word. The other option you have is when you think of the next line of the story, but the next letter doesn't fit, you throw away that first idea and say, what's the first word I can think of that starts with the next letter of the alphabet? And then just blurt that word out and then build the story around that. So for example, I had no intention of the word kick. I had no idea that the inspector was going to be a cruel person adopting the cats. But when it came to kick, honestly, between you and me, the first word I came up with was kill. I thought some people might be too offended by that. On the fly, I switched it to kick. Now that gave the story a whole new direction, right? And it moved the story forward. It made the story more interesting. It added conflict. It moved it forward. When you do that, when you say, I'm going to let go of this original idea and step into uncertainty, because I had an idea for the story, when I'm willing to let that go and step into uncertainty, that opens up creativity. That lets me be playful and faster, and that ultimately makes it more successful. The biggest challenge I have when training improvisers is this unwillingness to let go of the idea they had, not realizing that all the great stuff happens when you step into that uncertainty. Now, off stage, you have the same kind of choices, right? You're going to have your plan for your project. You're going to have your agenda for the day or a conversation, and you've envisioned here's how this conversation is going to go. And you go to implement and you get pushback on your idea, or something throws a day out of whack, or the conversation, the person's giving you objections you didn't anticipate. In that moment, you can be like that improviser who says, well, here was my plan, and I think this was a good plan, so let me stick with that, even though the conditions around have changed. And when you do that, you're going to create tension, and it's going to be antagonistic, and you're going to cut off creativity because you got tunnel vision, and ultimately be less successful. If, however, like the improviser, you can say, oh, that plan's not working, let me shift into this direction. Let me listen and explore what they're saying, even though it's different than what I anticipated. Let me think, what can I do creatively in a new direction now that my original plan isn't working, right? We start using our creativity and see what can happen. Now, here's the thing. You're not burning your bridges. You're not setting this in stone. You can always go back to the original plan if you explore and realize, oh no, this isn't that good. The original plan is still better. But when you step out here, you open your mind to possibilities and creativity. So many of us immediately say yes, but, and block that progress. We miss out on so much. And in this world, if we want to step into the future, right, the future will always be uncertain. And the more we just cling to an existing plan or an old plan to maintain certainty, the less opportunity we're going to have to move into that future and embrace it, right? Now, this is inherently scary. Stepping into uncertainty is scary. So the way I'd recommend you do that is with one small yes and at a time, one small step at a time. I know it's weird as a motivational speaker. I'm supposed to be saying things like jump in 110% or burn your bridges or, go all in, massive action. But I find that exhausting. And I also find that as a way of never actually getting started, right? It's overwhelming and you're like, people procrastinate or it's not sustainable. Yeah, you can take massive action, but it often tapers off. One of the most important but hardest things for an improviser to learn is the power of just focusing and being present on their one next step. So for example, in this A to Z game, if I tried to come up with a whole A to Z story, it would be so hard. Or if before I said kick the cat, right? I needed to know where that story was going, I would never get started. It would be overwhelming because you're trying to navigate the entire thing. When you start with just one step and say, okay, and now let's take the next step, and now let's take the next step. This is how improv comedians turn magic out of nothing, right? And most of us want to have the whole thing figured out before we take the first yes and. And if you want to get started with yes and, pick a small yes and, because when you think small, you get two huge benefits. Number one, it lets you get started, right? We all know people that are getting ready to get ready. They want to have the whole A to Z plan figured out before they say the first yes and. Instead, have a plan. You can have a giant vision. I'm all about big goals, but take one small step, right? If I try to write a story A to Z, I would want time. I'd say I need like an hour to write out a story. But if I say just say a sentence starts with A, okay, manageable. So it gets you started. The second thing, taking it step by step, one small step at a time, is it gives you the power of being agile and nimble and adapting as you go. Yes, exactly. Someone is agile methodology is you take that first step and then you see what happens. And then you make an adjustment. And then you take the next step. And then you see how it goes and then make an adjustment. I call this act, analyze, adjust. Now, 20, 30 years ago, the winners were the ones who made the best plan and executed it effectively. Now, I think the world has changed. Now the winners are the ones who are fast movers, who have an idea but take action, see what happened, and make an adjustment. And what's interesting is when you do it this way, you may end up somewhere completely different than your original plan. But it will 9 times out of 10 be far better than where you thought you were going because you took feedback, you adjusted, you made it better each step of the way. So let me ask you, what's a small step you can take today, right? It could be, researching that program that you've been thinking about. It could be, working on that project that you've been putting off. It could be having that conversation you've been putting off having because you're not quite sure how the person's going to respond, right? Whatever it is, take one small step, see what happens, make an adjustment. Say the next small yes and, see what happens, make an adjustment. By doing that, you will see some powerful, interesting things start to happen, and you will make a lot of progress. So that's a basic idea of saying yes and versus yes, but I'm going to finish up with one final thing. Before I do, I want to quickly, in the chat box, I'm going to put a URL. It's both my website. Ooh, that is not my, that is not what I had. I'm going to quickly put a URL in there. If you want some more information, this is my website. It's also a link where you can get some free downloads. There's PDF documents. There's an improv game guide that explains some of these games and how to play them and how to lead and debrief them. There's an MP3 of a prior presentation I did. So a lot of free stuff. If you're interested, go to that URL and download it. If you're on the phone, it's avishparashar.com/gift. If you've got a question, you can throw it in the chat. If I have a couple minutes, I'll try to answer. If not, email me and contact me afterwards. Go to my website. I'm happy to help with that. So let me finish up here with a quick, first, let me start with a question to finish up. It's a simple question, but it might be controversial. What, in the chat box, please answer this question. What rock and roll band would you say is the greatest of all time? What's the greatest rock and roll band of all time? Just go ahead and throw it in the chat box. I'm curious to hear your answer. All right, we got Rolling Stone, Foo Fighters, more with the Stones, AC/DC. Awesome. A lot of Stones fans here. Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, Metallica. All great answers. Those are all wonderful bands, and they could all make a case for being the greatest rock and roll band of all time. A lot of Stones, a lot of Beatles. Well, I am here, unfortunately, to tell you that you were all wrong. No offense. But the greatest rock and roll band of all time is unquestionably the Canadian power trio known as Rush. Yeah, Rush. All right. It's a subjective question, I know, but my favorite band is Rush. And if you don't know Rush, they're this trio of guys. They are technically masters at what they do. The drummer is often considered the best. The bass is often considered the best, or at least one of the best. And the guitarist, while not considered the best, is in the conversation for like top 15 or 20 guitarists of all time. And they're known for writing technically challenging music. And someone listed in the chat, their most famous song is a song called Tom Sawyer, which they have been playing over and over again. Sadly, the drummer passed away, so they're not around anymore. But at the 30th anniversary, they have played this song Tom Sawyer at every concert they have ever played since 1981. And a journalist asked them, "Is that still fun for you to play?" And the drummer Neil thought about it, and he said, "You know what? It is still fun for me to play because that song is sufficiently difficult to still be interesting." He's like, all those songs, the fills are hard, so I have to really focus and be in the moment. And when I get it right, I feel good because it was challenging. I get a little dopamine hit. And that phrase stuck out in my head. Sufficiently difficult. See, in a world that's constantly changing and we get overwhelmed, all we want is things to be easier. So we say, yeah, but I wish things could be easier. Yeah, but when it's simpler, I'll be more engaged or motivated. And that's how you get stressed and burnt out. But maybe the key isn't to make things easier, but rather to make them harder. Sufficiently difficult to be interesting. Not in every area, but in the one area that matters to you, right? Your career, your business, your department, or even something out of work. Because I think when we get motivation in other areas, it spills over, right? What's that thing that you can take and instead of making everything easier, make that one thing harder so it becomes more interesting and engaging? And I'm guessing you know where to start already because you have what I call a persistent yes, but. You've got some idea that keeps popping up in your head. Your mind keeps telling you to try this, do this. And every time you say, yeah, but I can't do that. Yeah, but it's too hard. Yeah, but I don't have time. Yeah, but I'm tired. Whatever it is, that's the thing that when you can say yes and to it, it could change everything. Because if their mind is giving you that, it's giving you that for a reason. It thinks there's merit. That's the thing that when you could stop saying yes, but to say yes and one small little yes and step into uncertainty and look to the future and make that sufficiently difficult, that could change everything. It can not only get you re-engaged and remotivated, it can also let you achieve goals that you never even thought were possible. So thank you for enjoying me and thank you for participating here. Thank you for joining me in the chat. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. If you have questions, please throw them in the chat or visit me on my website. If I can serve you in any way, please let me know. And thank you to Michael and Angela and Alexia from Synario for inviting me. You guys were an awesome audience.
Thank you, Avish. Yeah, very much appreciate your time. Very insightful, and I hope everyone else found it as informational as I did. We will be going ahead and taking a few short minute break here before we get started with the next session. As Avish had mentioned, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll make sure to document them and connect you all afterwards. Thank you.